Hey everybody, ronarray here, and my bleed Lacerate Gladiator turned out to be a pretty strong league starter. As you can see, block provides crazy survivability, which just feels great. I've been able to get all watchstones pretty fast and run a few tier 17 even on subpar gear, so the build is pretty strong right now. In this video I want to provide an update for the build to showcase all the changes that I made to make it better during the first days of playing. The video is pretty in-depth as usual, so check out all the timestamps to find the answers to your questions. And let's go! So first thing that I pretty much changed is approach to auras. Since survivability of the build is pretty high just with basic block and it can survive literally everything, I decided to drop determination, at least for now, to get more damage into the build, to pretty much kill enemies faster and progress faster as well. So Pride aura is still stays, but the rest is a little changed. We're still using Herald of Purity as well, because Herald of Purity is providing pretty decent damage, and Sentinels of Purity can draw a little aggro from our character. But on top of that, I decided to use Summon Skitterbots for an aura, because it can provide additional damage for the character just based on shocks, and Auto Extortion. It's pretty much automated cursors that I will already showcase in a separate video, you can check it out. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in that video as well. So that's a new set of auras. If you'll have more mana, I think Summon Skitterbot could be replaced with Malevolence, because Malevolence is a pretty great aura. So if you don't really use Auto Extortion and you don't really like it, you can use Malevolence instead of Summon Skitterbots. So I added Eviscerate, and I think it's a pretty nice one. Look how well it clears. So just with one big hit, you are able to clear a lot of monsters at the same time, because it has a pretty great AoE. So here's the example of AoE. As you can see, it hits on a very long distance and it clears pretty good too. Unfortunately, it's not always easy to hit enemies with waves, but I still think it's worth it. So in that video, I'm just using only Retaliate scale. And I think it's pretty much worth it. It also can help applying bleed to running enemies and stuff like that. As a support, I'm using a very pretty set. I'm using Calling Strike together with Brutality, melee physical damage, and Eviscerate. So Calling Strike is here to pretty much help us to Calling Strike bosses and tougher enemies. Since we're using Eviscerate from time to time, I decided to utilize it because Calling Strike can help a lot. So another thing that I currently utilized is pretty much Blood Tincture. I think Blood Tincture is pretty amazing. It can provide us with 70% increased damage with bleeding, at least up to 90%. It can also provide a pretty decent amount of damage over time multiplier with melee attacks, up to 30%. It also applies mana burn rate, but since we are leeching a lot of mana, we can still have uptime of Blood Tincture for at least like 4 to 10 seconds, depends on how often we are hitting and how enemies are around us. You can also calculate the damage that Blood Tincture provides in path of building. You will be able to add it to configuration, and I'm going to showcase it later in the video. So don't hesitate to do that. Overall, Blood Tincture is definitely recommended, and I think it's a very great thing to pretty much increase our damage with not a lot of cost. So another important part is pretty much the 3 changes. Since the build survived very good and block of spells been pretty much enough, I decided not to go for early suppression and to focus on damage instead, because our survivability is already high enough to farm even tier 17. So generally for additional damage, I decided to go down there and pretty much take Dirty Techniques. Dirty Techniques is really helping with ramping up our damage and dealing damage faster. I'm also taking the mastery for 10% less damage taken from damage over time right here, because I think it's just an amazing mastery and we have a lot of issues with damage over time overall. Iron Reflexes is a great way to stack more armor since we have a lot of evasion on different items, so it's definitely recommended. I also decided to exchange a few nodes additionally and pretty much drop Fortify here and instead take Master of Wounds, because Master of Wounds can help us with damage over time multiplier, and you can also take Bleed Duration if you are going to use a Ryslatha. So if you are going really fast together with Volatility, you need to take both those nodes for bleed duration. And to fix out the mana, I think Cannibalistic Rite is just absolutely awesome, because it can help us to lower the whole price for our skill and mana from 35 to 20, so almost in half. That way we just need to take 2 nodes here, and mana reservation efficiency comes in handy as well. I also added Bleeding Mastery for 3% to damage your time multiplier for bleeding per endurance charge. I think it's a very nice stack because we have pretty decent amount of endurance charges and it should work just great. There's not a lot of additional changes on top of that, and it's pretty much the main parts that help me to rise the damage. So another very important change that happened. When the game just released, I noticed that Shield Mastery for block is not working as we expected it to work. So generally we expected for Shield Mastery to work together with our Ascendancy Determined Survivor. But it's not working together. So instead of taking 50% from Determined Survivor, it's taking amount of block chance from your actual shield. It pretty much leads us to a situation where if your block chance on your shield is around 25%, you will not have enough block to pretty much cap it. It leads us to a very clever and basic solution. So as you can see, spell block chance here is not capped as 81%. So solution here is to spend one more point for that little node right here. It will give us almost maximum, so 87 instead of 88 block chance. And it's definitely worth it for better survivability. So it's easy to fix and feel free to do that, I'm sure it's going to help. However, if on your shield you have more than 25 or 26 chance to block, like 30 for example, or 35, you could have enough block chance just without small node as well. So if it's the case, just don't spend the point and keep it like that. Just make sure that your block chances are right. To check your actual block chance, you will need to open configuration and put have you blocked recently configuration right here. So another thing that I changed is pretty much set of supports. I'm using Lacerate of Hemorrhage, and up to that, I'm also using Awakened Swift Affliction support. It's not really levering duration of my blades that much, and it feels just fine. On top of that, I'm still using melee physical damage support together with brutality support and volatility support. I think volatility is a pretty nice addition. It can be used even with Ryslatha if you have a proper attack speed. And the last support is Fortify. So as I already showcased, I dropped Fortify from the tree and decided to use a support instead. Mostly because the difference between Fortify support and any other support that we can get for that slot is only about 10% of damage. So I thought that 5 points that we are spending right here in Steadfast cost more than pretty much 10% of damage, and I can just get more out of it. That's why I decided to get Fortified here. Another important question is why I'm not using Cruelty. So I'm not using Cruelty because our hit damage is not big enough, and Cruelty will not have a maximum amount of buff at all times. So I think it just feels a little lackluster, especially at bosses. So another cool thing that I can recommend and already recommended in the separate video is automation of curses. I'm using Auto Exertion together with Battle Mage Cry and Vulnerability. All of that pretty much ensures that uptime of my vulnerability is 100%. And on top of that, I use Cold Snap, because Cold Snap can give me a pretty easy way to get frenzy charges without bothering with Blood Rage, which will drain my health, and I a little dislike it because it will lower our defenses against damage over time, because we will have less regeneration. So Cold Snap for frenzy charges and vulnerability is currently my pick, but I've been thinking about adding Punishment together with another Annoyed Old Amulet for additional cures. For now I don't have it, so I use Cold Snap and Vulnerability. So another great question, if we are not using Determination, how to get our physical damage reduction up? So I recommend to roll additional physical damage reduction on your body armor, and if it's possible on your shield as well. So just roll like at least 6 plus 6% and it's going to help you to survive much better against physical damage. And it also will help you against the one-shots. If you can get like chaos resistance, for example, or more life, it will be nice. So definitely worth it. Also, getting mana reservation efficiency of skills on our body armor is a pretty important way how to fit in all the auras. If you don't have increased mana reservation efficiency of skills there, you will need to drop some random aura or auto exertion. That way you can pretty much drop summon skitterbots and get vitality in instead, because it's a pretty decent option. Another question that I receive pretty often is Jack the Axe still good? So I've been using a normal axe with a pretty high physical DPS and with physical damage over time for some time. I think that choice is perfectly viable. But right now, Jack the Axe is a very good option as well, and it could be used in many cases. So right now the prices for Jack the Axe are like heavily lower, and you still can get it. The main reason why Jack the Axe is good is pretty much the buff it can provide, so Thirst for Blood. Without Thirst for Blood, it's pretty easy to beat Jack the Axe in terms of damage. But Thirst for Blood can provide both life regeneration and more damage with bleeding, which is very good because it's a multiplier. So if you have Jack the Axe, you can definitely use it, and it's a very strong option against many axes until you will get to endgame when top axes are going to beat it. So another good question is Ryslatha worth it? So I think Ryslatha right now is a pretty strong build. It can provide up to 40% of additional bleed damage, just with 4 maximum physical attack damage bonus. Make sure you have quality attack modifiers buffed on that, and I'm sure it's going to help you. However, Ryslatha together with volatility will lead to a very big difference in physical damage. So from 4k to 161k. It will lead to requirement of doing more attacks per second. So perfectly try to rise your attack speed at least from bonuses from the gloves, for example. And it will lead us to a very important question. How big should be bleed duration? So for Ryslatha, to properly provide you any damage, you will need at least 4 seconds of bleed. So as you can see in my path of bleeding right here, I have 3.98 seconds of bleed. And it's definitely recommended for any kind of Ryslatha setup. So try to get your bleed duration up and check it in path of bleeding, you can check it here. Aim for at least 4 seconds, but 5 would be even better. It will rise your quality of life significantly because your bleed will roll higher more often. So to get your bleed duration up, there's another cool thing that I want to showcase. You can anoint Wicked Blade on your amulet, and that's a very cool anoint. You can get it for a very basic set of oils, and it will cost literally nothing. It's Amber, Verdant, and Indigo. And you will save 3 points at least, because you don't need attacks have chance to cause bleeding, so those points are pretty much lost. Anointing Wicked Blade is going to help you with bleed duration and will increase your damage with bleeding too. It's very important for Ryslatha setup, so try to anoint it as fast as possible. Another pretty important moment is Spell Suppression. So right now I have only 12% of Spell Suppression because I decided not to go for end range and not to roll too much of Spell Suppression items because those are very expensive right now and the build can survive just fine without it. So the big question is what we can do with that, and is Spell Suppression useless at all? So it's not useless for sure, and I think in endgame version there could be a possibility to stack it back. But right now I think survivability of the build is good enough to pretty much survive just with 12% of Spell Suppression or even 0% of Spell Suppression. Just stacking charges and additional bonuses will be pretty much enough to feel great in almost all cases. So don't worry about Spell Suppression too much. If you already capped it, it's good. If you don't have it capped, don't worry and just play like that. Your survivability will be very high just based on block. Another reminder, it's pretty much important to showcase how we are generating our endurance charges. So generally, Inexorable is a great way to generate charges, and I promoted it in my previous video already. However, Inexorable is definitely a great node, so feel free to take it. Together with Aggressive Bastion, which is going to give us 10% chance to get Endurance Charge on kill while we are holding a shield, we are always going to have Endurance Charges. Even on bosses, Inexorable works pretty good because they're hitting you often enough, even with basic attacks. So I think right now it's probably the best way to generate charges, considering using the Endurance Cry would be very clunky. Another interesting question is pretty much Cluster Jewels option. We currently have two places for Cluster Jewels here and here. I genuinely recommend to go with that one because it's going to save you 1 point that you will spend here instead. So in Cluster Jewel, we can take a lot of damage. So if you are going to take a Cluster Jewel, the only reason why you would need it is pretty much to fix your leech issues. So basic leech for big Cluster Jewel and then using slots, like jewel sockets, to pretty much get cool bonuses from the jewels. And you can just get for Feed the Fury or Fuse the Fight together with like Martial Prowess, for example, or any other buff, so it will work just fine. If you're going to do that, you have an opportunity to get rid of Vitality Void completely, and that way. There's also important part talking about the jewels. I definitely recommend to get good jewels for your build. You can look at jewel like there. It's pretty expensive, however you can drop one of the stats and just go for physical damage over time multiplier and like global physical or increased damage over time, and it will be much more affordable. So overall jewels are very good for the build and they can provide up to 7% of DPS together with some health, which is going to boost durability. So feel free to get some of them. So that's been the update for my Bleed Lacerate Gladiator. The build comes up pretty good, and I'm sure we'll be able to push it even forward. There are going to be more endgame updates later on, so stay tuned. And feel free to check out my streams on both YouTube and Twitch if you're interested in my progression or gameplay. Thank you very much for watching, guys. ronarray out.